So next up, we have Matt Gaetz objects to the electors. That's right, Matt Gaetz, Congressman Matt Gaetz of Florida, objects to the electors in Congress. I have to tell you, I listened to all of the speeches on the House floor, and I was hopeful to hear someone who was aspirational, intelligent, and at the same time used the Constitution of the United States as a guide so that it would be a teaching moment for the American people. And Matt Gaetz filled that order. He did a terrific job, by far the best job on the House floor. And so we have Matt Gaetz. We have a series of actual clips from Matt Gaetz, and you have to listen to all of them to really get a true flavor of the history of 2020 and what had happened during the election to the present time. And Gaetz talks about that in great detail and is so convincing, and also with great humor and irony. And so first up, we have a clip with Matt Gaetz talking about President Trump asked for peaceful protests. Listen to the oohs and ahs from the opposition party, from the Democrats on the floor. I mean, they can't even listen to speech without getting offended, without getting triggered. We have that clip, and here it is.
That this morning, President Trump explicitly called for demonstrations and protests to be peaceful. He was far more, you can moan and groan, but he was far more explicit about his calls for peace than some of the BLM and left-wing rioters were this summer when we saw violence sweep across this nation.
So there you go. So they literally, on the House floor, the Democrats just got completely and utterly triggered because you can't ever criticize BLM or Antifa if you're a Democrat. Can you imagine? A normal American, no matter who they are, no matter what their ideology, would say, you know what, you're absolutely right. We need to talk more as a citizen and as a country and as a people about how wrong it is for people to burn, pillage, break into businesses, break into houses, harass people outside of their houses, and do all of these bad things to our country without any kind of police presence. We need to talk more about that and say it's wrong, just like it was wrong what happened in the Capitol. That's what Gaetz was talking about, and the Democrats get completely and utterly triggered on the House floor because they're like, oh, no, you can't say these things. If you say these things, then they are our supporters. We can't have our supporters upset at us, so we have to ooh and ah on the House floor. We have to do that so that our supporters know that we're triggered, we're with them. Just disgusting. And so Gaetz continues in the same speech. He says, we're following the Constitution. And you should listen very carefully to this because here is a really key part of this objection, the speech that Gaetz is giving about objecting to the electors because it's happened before. Guess from whom? Listen to Gaetz. Here's the clip.
Now, we came here today to debate, to follow regular order, to offer an objection, to follow a process that is expressly contemplated in our Constitution. And for doing that, we got called a bunch of seditious traitors. Now, not since 1985 has a Republican president been sworn in, absent some Democrat effort, to object to the electors. But when we do it, it is the new violation of all norms. And when those things are said, people get angry.
So many years ago, Democrats started coming on the House floor when Republican presidents won. They would come on the House floor on the day that you were supposed to vote for confirm and the electors on the House floor, and they would object to the electors. No proof of anything, no media reports of problems or issues. But that's when they started that. The Democrats did. The Republicans are coming on the House floor, and including Matt Gaetz, and he provides specific information, and he lays it out and discusses it and says, you know, you're having a problem with that as a Democrat? You guys have been doing this for decades. You've been doing this for decades. We haven't done it at all until now. And here we are in the House floor talking about specific situations where we should at least discuss how to bring the country together. And once again, Democrats on the House floor are triggered. So Matt Gaetz then says something that I think every reasonably intelligent American suspects about the break-in of the Capitol of those several hundred people. So you saw what I saw. You saw people breaking into the Capitol and several hundred people, yet there's 1 million people in D.C., right? But a very, very, very small group of people break in. And I looked at some of these people, not all, but some of those people who were breaking in. I saw how they were dressed. One guy in particular had this familiar-looking hat and a backpack, and he was dressed in all black, including long pants. And I thought, I feel like I've seen this guy before in an Antifa riot, or he at least is dressed like an Antifa supporter. And so do I have proof? No. But Matt Gaetz actually talks about this in the same speech. We have that clip, and here it is.
Home, and I don't know if the reports are true, but the Washington Times has just reported some pretty compelling evidence from a facial recognition company showing that some of the people who breached the Capitol today were not Trump supporters. They were masquerading as Trump supporters, and in fact, were members of the violent terrorist group Antifa. Now, we should seek to build America up, not tear her down and destroy her. And I am sure glad that at least for one day, I didn't hear my Democrat colleagues calling to defund the police.
So at that point, Congressman Matt Gaetz got a standing ovation from the Republicans in the gallery, clapping and cheering, because isn't it ironic? The Democrats don't want to talk about who actually broke into the Capitol. They don't want to know if some were extremists from the right and were also Trump supporters, and that also some were Antifa. They don't even want to have that discussion, even though facial recognition technology will prove it. And Gaetz even said so. But they don't want to have that conversation. And then when Gaetz says, yeah, well, we had all these people breaking into the Capitol, guess who finally restored order? The police! And after the police restored order in the Capitol, the very Democrats, the nutjobs who think that we should defund police in the Democrat Party, didn't say anything about it whatsoever. Suddenly, we need the police because, we're politicians. We're really important. We need to be protected. And the police are here for us, but not for you. You don't need police. That is epic. That is an epic part of Matt Gaetz's speech on the House floor. So then Gaetz continues and he talks about fairness in elections. Really kind of hits it hard and does a great job. And we have that clip, and here it is.
I appreciate all the talk of coming together, but let us not pretend that our colleagues on the left have been free of some anti-democratic impulses just because we signed on to legal briefs and asked courts to resolve disputes. There were some on the left who said that we should not even be seated in the body, that we ought to be prosecuted, maybe even jailed. Those arguments anger people, but people do understand the concepts of basic fairness. And no competition, contest, or election can be deemed fair if the participants are subject to different rules. Baseball teams that cheat and steal signs should be stripped of their championships. Russian Olympians who cheat and use steroids should be stripped of their medals, and states that do not run clean elections should be stripped of their electors.
There's the argument, right? States that don't run clean elections, the consequences, electors should be stripped away from them. And that is the fundamental part of Matt Gaetz's objection to those electors, that the states didn't have a fair playing field for the election because they gamed the election rules at the very last minute so that it heavily skewed, and we're not even talking about big tech's influence, just the states themselves heavily skewed the election results to, of course, the Democrat Party. And if that isn't enough, Gaetz continues on, he says, and here's how the election went down. He literally explains it, does a terrific job. This is the last clip of this series, but you gotta listen to it. Here it is.
In 2016, Democrats found out that they couldn't beat Donald Trump at the ballot box with voters who actually show up, so they turned to impeachment and the witness box. And when that failed, they ran to the mailbox, where this election saw an unprecedented amount of votes that could not be authenticated with true ID, with true signature match, and with true confidence for the American people. Our Article 3 courts have failed by not holding evidentiary hearings to weigh the evidence. We should not join in that failure. We should vindicate the rights of states. We should vindicate the subpoenas in Arizona that have been issued to get a hold of these voting machines, and we should reject these electors.
And that is Matt Gaetz' speech. That is Matt Gaetz' speech. Just fantastic speech. It is by far the best objection to the electors speech on the House floor, hands down, because he summarizes the hypocrisy of the Democrat Party. He summarizes and talks about how they just say they want to follow the Constitution, but then when the Republicans want to do the same, they actually want to follow the Constitution and object to the electors, the Democrats are saying this has never happened before. Meanwhile, the Democrats have been doing it for decades. For decades. In fact, every single election cycle they've been doing it. Talks about fairness. Talks about how they want to defund police. At the same time, they want the police to protect them in the Capitol when the Capitol building is breached. And then finally, talks about the fact that the actual states, the states themselves, come on, not all the states, but the swing states clearly changed the rules of the game last minute, and it clearly skewed one side versus the other. And if you are a Democrat and you don't think any of what I'm saying right now matters, then I think you have a problem, because what you're going to see instead is a lot more protests. And I don't want to see violent protests, never have, never support that. But here's the thing, if this goes unaddressed, this meaning this election where we don't have real ID and we don't have people voting in person, this doesn't happen moving forward, then I think we're going to really have a problem holding our country together. And that is Matt Gaetz objects to the electors.